We went into various drugstores, signing our enemies' names on the books. Chad was very good at looking as though he was suffering from diarrhea, but whenever a pharmacist would say he was out of it, his whole facade was shattered instantly. Right, right, he would say, laughing his head off. You sure are. I told him that maybe this was not good thinking, but he said, what the hell? The guy already said we weren't getting any, and he did have a point there. We spent about 2 weeks like this, and it was any door with a lock after we boiled the stuff down to this awful looking brown molasses. We went in the bathrooms in hamburger joints. We drove out west of town to stop by cow pastures. We got off under street lamps and on side streets. When we didn't feel like hunting around for a safe place, though, we went to this girl's garage apartment in West Palm Beach. She had a record player, a big stereo, which counted for something, and she was very nice about the whole thing. It wasn't her cup of tea, she said, but she did think it was all very interesting. Then one night she had a big party with all kinds of awful high school and college kids, got drunk and impressed everybody, describing how we cooked down the paregoric. We heard about that at the other end of town through some distant acquaintances and decided to step up our travel plans instead of burning our house down. It was the night after that, as we sat around thinking urgently, that we decided the trip would or could be dismal with all that walking and identifying ourselves to ham-fisted cops who would keep us moving at the very least. So we borrowed some money and went on down to Miami with the sincerest intention of buying up some bennies and leaving the same day in a blaze of glory. But we got involved with some friends of mine, which is what usually happens to any timetable, and we clean forgot New York for a while. Here's what happened. It took us 4 hours to hitchhike to Miami that day, and that day was hot as hell. So we were hoping for a swell foop and no trouble, but the man with the pharmaceuticals had gone to a friend's house, and when we got over there he'd gone back, and it was just so on and on ad infinitum, until finally we got disgusted and dropped by a gas station where a friend of mine worked. As we came walking around the corner, there was Shell, squatting between the gas pumps and glaring at the traffic. Skinny ogre him, just dared anybody to get his gas. I hadn't seen him for a while, so we ha-ha'd and slapped each other around for a few minutes. Then we all went inside to talk things over. He at his ratty old desk, me on a pile of old tires, and Chad leaning in the doorway. The sun pounded in through the windows on two sides of us, and the smell of oil and grease snaked in from the garage. I asked him about A, and he said, "No, there's none of that vulgar stuff to be had, but come over to Richard's house later and see." I watched a bunch of Cubans wandering up the street towards the Orange Bowl, thought something about Guevara, and then remembered who Richard was. A priest was what? And in one of those vegetable visionary foundations. I think it was the Neo-American Church. So I asked Chad if he'd ever had LSD before, because I thought if he hadn't, maybe the situation should be better and maybe I shouldn't be around. You never know. A lot of people who say they ought to know say that LSD will never do permanent harm, but never's a big word in reference to mind, and I think there's always the chance that some poor fool might crack a one-way dimension. I just don't like the feeling of being responsible for such things, and besides, even if the damage isn't permanent, I hate explaining to the police why my friend is doing that. But Chad assured me that he was acquainted with the stuff, and during the 2 hours it took to get dark, we walked out of the business district and finally, after many leagues down the narrow roads, into the green residential area where Richard lived. On the way over, I got to thinking about my ape-man heritage for some unknown reason, and I felt pretty hairy by the time we arrived. Richard had a beautiful one-room place in a clearing. There were rafters in there, too, and as we came in, he was there impressing a dizzy broad from the University of Miami. They were talking about enlightenment, ha ha, and the tranquility of the void, ultimate purity, and related subjects. I decided that my steaming brute, slogging through a million muddy years with just 5 fingers and a rumbling stomach, wouldn't fit in here. Could he sit enraptured with a rose in his gory fist? So I just clammed up and talked philosophy for a while. I hate philosophy. So I steered the conversation around to telling Richard that we wanted a trip. He said, shit, yes. He had some of the old sacrament ready and handy. So Chad and I split a cube that didn't do anything much. So we bought another and split it intravenous. Richard and his girl thought the syringe unlovely, to say the least, and made us go in the bathroom to get off. Religious persecution. That's what it was, but it was worth it. I sat still for a long time thinking about cathedrals, and Chad went and sat down real quiet and happy looking. As I came out of the bathroom, rolling down my sleeve, I found Richard, Shell, and the girl meditating, I think is how they would have described it. The girl was sitting in the lotus posture with her head thrown back and her tits absolutely seared the air, or so it seemed to me through my loony eyes. She was very fine footage indeed, but I didn't think that she or anyone present would appreciate my idea of oneness with the allness, so I just sat down.